And it looks like we are streaming. Hello, Facebook. Hello, YouTube. And I will play the music and let everybody in. Welcome, everybody. I think Glenn was going to say the welcome, but
Ah, I'm so used to you starting it off, Todd. It's hard for me to be the one to start it off. So, welcome everybody to the Veterans Breakfast Club Happy Hour, a special edition, if you will, for Thursday, June. That's wishful thinking. December 14th. Todd is back from Vietnam, and we're going to talk about that for just a moment or so here. But as you all know, because you've all seen our promotions, we have with us tonight the legendary explorer and the widely known, widely acclaimed Dr. Bob Ballard. Bob, please say hello from your cozy looking office there.
Yeah, I'm in Lyme, Connecticut, right on the Connecticut River with a nice fire going and trying to get warm. It's 31 degrees right now, so don't lick a flagpole.
Sage advice. Well, we're not only we're pleased, we're honored to have you on. But I want to make a special shout out to Jeff Ballard, who is the nephew of Bob Ballard. Jeff, say hello, please.
Hello, everyone.
Any of you remember Jeff through our programs on the naval battles of Guadalcanal? He's been on at least a couple of times, if not 3 times. I think anytime we touch on the South Pacific, particularly the Solomon campaigns, Jeff is our expert. Jeff, thanks very much for being a member of the BBC and contributing so much.
Great. Well, it's nice to be here, Glenn. And Todd, welcome back.
thank you very much.
And the key name here is Ballard, as in Jeff Ballard and Bob Ballard. And Jeff, thank you so much for connecting us with Bob and helping bring him on the program. This is a really special event for us. So, Bob, before we get into an introduction, let me welcome Todd back from Vietnam. I think he left with 21 people to go to Vietnam, and he brought all 21 back and a cold. You've also brought back a cold.
Yes, we left no man behind. We did catch a cold. It seems just, I know I started feeling the effects on the way home, on the plane on the way home. So my voice is still a little scratchy, but man, was it a great trip. 21 of us, 5 had served in country in Vietnam during the war. We were able to really retrace some of their steps and, stand in the very spots where they stood 50 years ago. It was really something else. I mean, it's always something else it's still for as progressive and as cosmopolitan, at least South Vietnam is, it's still a very exotic place and very different than the United States. Even in the 21st century, still this adherence to Confucian values, which is absolutely apparent everywhere you go. And also a very friendly and welcoming place, especially in the South again, where people kind of come up to you and want to talk to you and want to thank you for, as an American, they want to thank Americans for kind of coming to their country and, believe it or not, fighting that war, at least fighting for a way of life that Southerners have embraced. And that is certainly just a wonderful experience for our veterans. And it's just a great experience to travel with our vets and, explore the country, get to know some of the people, and then also get to know our veterans and their stories. So yeah, it was terrific. We're going to be, I did about 10 or 11 posts about the trip on our website. I will be sharing with those in our VBC bulletin. So, and I think we'll probably end up doing a program with some of the travelers, kind of highlighting what what the trip was all about. So look for that in January. Thank you, Glenn.
Now, let me ask one question, then we'll go to Bob. Last time you were in Vietnam was 2019, 18?
We went in 2018, we went in 2020, so this was our third trip.
Different than the previous trips?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, the absolute changes. Definitely changes since COVID. And I'll be quick about it, but I was really taking notes. The first major change, and you notice it right away, and it's fascinating, was that there were no Chinese tourists. Both years, we're sharing hotels with Chinese tourists. We're sharing our breakfast with you see them on the streets. They're at many of the same locations. And this year, none, zero. And there was a reason for that. And it was because China started printing on their passports a map of China with the 9-dash line, which includes the territorial waters and the islands, the Spratly Islands, for example, in the South China Sea. And so Vietnam will not stamp those passports because of the map.
Wow.
And they won't allow Chinese in. And they say it's devastating to their economy because so many Chinese tourists come, but it's the issue of sovereignty is so important that they won't compromise it. And so there were a lot of, instead of Chinese tourists, there were a lot of South Koreans, which I had not seen before, almost no Russians, which I had seen before, and more Europeans than I remember. So that was just one little major difference.
Yeah. Wow. But that's I haven't heard that reported anywhere.
Yeah.
Not aware of that. That's fascinating piece of diplomatic news, if you will.
Yeah, it's diplomatic news, and it's also like a little glimpse into the long history that Vietnam has had with China and the very difficult relationship they have with China, because they're so close and dependent on them on the one hand, and yet threatened by them on the other hand. And so it's this balancing act that Vietnam has become expert in playing over thousands of years.
Yeah, great. Well, we're going to want to hear a lot more about that in the next couple of months. So let's get to the main event. Dr. Robert Ballard, who we've already introduced just a bit. I'm not going to go into a formal introduction and list all of Dr. Ballard's achievements because that would take up half the program. But I think all of you know of Dr. Bob Ballard from the news, from if you're alive, I think you know about him and his achievements. The founder of the Titanic, founder of the Bismarck, the explorer, oceanic explorer, has found many a World War II ship, and we're going to talk about those tonight, including the PT-109, the Yorktown, the Bismarck, et cetera, et cetera. So again, Bob, we're excited and honored to have you on the show. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me, and I welcome the opportunity to talk to you. A little background, I'm not a naval historian. My PhD, believe it or not, is in geology and geophysics. I'm an earth scientist. Although I started my career, my military career, actually, I was a second lieutenant, commissioned in 1965. I'm 82 this coming June. I was born 6 months after Pearl Harbor. But while I was in graduate school at the University of Southern California pursuing my PhD in marine geology and geophysics, there was a knock on the door, and there was a naval officer standing there, which was quite a surprise. Handed me an envelope, and I opened it and said, "Congratulations." And you probably should have not read past that, but it says you're no longer an Army intelligence officer. You're now in naval intelligence. And by the way, you have 6 days to report for active duty, which was quite stunning because I didn't realize the Army would let you go on delay to call to go to graduate school on your own nickel, but the Navy did not. So I found myself in a VW driving across the United States, reporting for active duty on March 7th, 1967. What I'm going to talk about is some of the expeditions I've conducted, but I'm pretty much still in academia. I have 2 appointments, one at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, where I founded the Deep Submergence Laboratory, and another one at the University of Rhode Island Graduate School of Oceanography. So I'm really an academician, but who likes to explore. And I'll talk about my ship that I acquired. I have a a ship now. If you were just finishing up our field season, if you go to nautiluslive.org, you'll find my ship. When I was growing up, my dream was to be Captain Nemo. And that came from not reading the book, but I'm dyslexic, so I prefer films. And I watched when I was 12 years old the Walt Disney movie 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and fell in love with Captain Nemo and his Nautilus. And when I was growing up in San Diego, right on the ocean, my father was working at Convair in aerospace. And naturally, parents always ask you, what do you want to be when you grow up? And when I told them I wanted to be Captain Nemo, fortunately, they didn't laugh. They probably went into the other room and said, Houston, we got a problem here. But they worked with me on it. And they said, well, tell me more about the Nautilus. And I said, well, it's a submarine. And they said, well, let's go down to San Diego and show you a submarine. So I went down to San Diego. This is in the 1959 when the movie came out. And it was a diesel sub, naturally. And I went on to serve in the Navy in deep submergence, and I'll talk about that in a minute, using deep diving assets. But then they said, well, the Nautilus was more than a submarine. I said, yeah, it had a big window. And when you opened the window, you could see the bottom of the ocean. And that's where I got fixated and became a marine geologist. So I've sort of wandered back and forth over my career in the development of the technology to explore, and then the use of that technology to do various missions. I've lost count, actually. I've done over 170 expeditions in my long career, starting in going to sea when I was 17 in 1959. Another common thing on my desk right now, as I'm looking behind this laptop, my daughter, who's dyslexic, loves to give me little plaques. And the one she sent me was, "Not all who wander are lost." And it turns out that if any of you out there are dyslexic, I strongly advise you to, because it's 20% of the population of the world, I strongly recommend you get the book Dyslexic Advantage, which is interesting because when I was growing up, those two words were never next to one another. But the new version of the Dyslexic Advantage says that dyslexics make great explorers because we're well developed in our right lobe. We think of ourselves as further evolved than non-dyslexics. But it turns out that I just love working in the dark because, as you know, most of our planet has never felt the warmth of the sun. And I don't feel lost down there. So when Jeff contacted me about your group, I looked at my 170 expeditions and I picked out the ones that dealt with World War II. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some of those expeditions, which for me really began in 1988, 1989, when I went after the German battleship Bismarck. And again, I'm not a historian, so don't hold me hard on everything I walk you through that's in the history books. What I enjoy doing is adding another chapter to these pieces of human history. And so let's start. I'm going to share my computer here, and we're going to start with my 1988-1989 expedition.
This is after you found the Titanic.
Yeah, well, that was, on the way to work. And that wasn't World War II.
No, yeah.
That was actually a cover for a top secret military operation. That's another story. And that was a Cold War story. But let's start with the Titanic. I mean, the Bismarck, which was, I found the Titanic in 1985. So this is about 3 years later. Actually, the reason I got involved in this one was because the film I did on Titanic was the highest rated television show in the history of cable television. And so naturally, National Geographic says, well, let's do that again. And so I conducted this one and didn't find it on the first one, got it on the second one. You never want to find things right away. You need to milk these projects and stretch them out over time. But as you know, the Bismarck was on it, like the Titanic, was on its maiden voyage when it was sunk. And this was sunk actually 9 months before I was born. So I was born into that. And as I said, it was on its, oops, why is that not advancing? Let's see if there we go. As you know, it was on its maiden voyage. I remember when I did the book on the finding of the Bismarck, and actually the Germans wanted a German version, but they edited out the picture of the wives waving goodbye to the crew of the Bismarck. So I've edited that out of this particular one. But
why would they edit that out, Bob?
You need to ask the Germans why they want to, because most of these guys didn't make it home. They also wouldn't publish my children's version of the Bismarck in Germany. It was very interesting. It was also interesting when I mapped the Lusitania, and I went to Germany on that one, and they were very proud of that one. But that wasn't World War II. That was another expedition. But as you know, the Bismarck came out of the. Well, I'll give you a little shot there. The Bismarck. How do I get my pictures covering up my slide? But you can see where the Bismarck came out on its maiden voyage, did its initial sea trials. And it was interesting because you'll see an important image coming up. While they were in their waters, heading up to Bergen, Norway to refuel, they had painted swastika, a giant swastika, on the bow and the stern of the Bismarck. But when they came into Bergen to refuel, they painted over the swastika because they were now going to be entering enemy waters, and they teamed up with the cruiser Prince Huygen. And the plan was to do what the Russians had to do and still do in the Cold War, is pass between the Greenland, Iceland, England, Norway gap. And so they came up and skirted over near the very edge of the ice sheets off of Greenland, where they then encountered the Hood and the Prince of Wales, waiting for anything trying to pass through that choke point. And as you know, there was the encounter that occurred when they came into range. And what was clever about the Germans is they had the silhouette of the Huygen and the silhouette of the Bismarck the same. And so normally when you see an enemy ship, you look into the book and you get its profile, and then you determine its length, and then you can do your initial bracketing salvo where you try to straddle the enemy ship. And obviously, if you straddle it on your first salvo, you know immediately how to fire for effect on your second salvo. And they misunderstood that. They thought that Bismarck was the Huygen, so they fired short. Well, the Bismarck did not fire short and was able to then straddle the Hood, which then sent its crew to there were only 3 people, the lookouts, who survived the sinking of the Hood, which was really, it was an old ship, but it was the sort of the heart and soul of the British Navy. And again, they didn't want to show that picture in the German version either. But so after their encounter and sinking of the Hood, what they didn't know, or what people didn't know, was that Bismarck has sustained a hit in the bow, which restricted access to its fuel. So it now had a fueling problem because it wasn't able to fully fuel in Bergen because a Spitfire spotted them and they knew they needed to get underway as fast as possible. So now they knew they had to actually break off their initial plan. Their initial plan was to come down into remember, America was not in the war at this time, and to attack the convoy routes from Canada over to England. And they realized they couldn't do that they needed to head back to Brest, which was now controlled by the Germans. And their goal was to, at the same time, Hitler was launching submarines and aircraft to give it cover if they could make it far enough back towards Brest. But H Group out of Gibraltar came in, and it was along with the ships that were pursuing them, and surrounded the Bismarck and as you know, put it on the bottom. And now here is a upper right and lower. Those are actual photographs of the Bismarck, and you'll notice that this then led to a beautiful TV program and a book, a magazine story on the sinking of the Bismarck. But in trying to find it, the most difficult thing is that I've done a lot. You know, you always do research on what happened and how it to narrow down the search area. And in the old days of technology, certainly the days of Titanic and finding Hood, you needed to get your search box down to about 100 to 150 square nautical miles to have a chance to locate it in any length of time. And like I say, the first time we searched in the area of the sinking, we were looking at different databases on where they thought the Bismarck was sunk. And like the Titanic, what I did was I actually went after it visually, which seems a little crazy, but not if you learn how to find things. When I found the Titanic, for example, I learned how to find ships that sink in the deep sea, like the Titanic, like the Bismarck, like any of these ships that are destroyed to some degree on the surface, or implode or break up on the sinking process, and they release a tremendous amount of debris. And being an oceanographer, you're aware of the circulation system of the world's oceans, and you don't really go looking for the ship, you go looking for its debris trail. Because these debris trails, and I certainly learned from mapping the Scorpion and then proved it again in the Titanic and the Bismarck, is they have debris trails that are more than a kilometer to 2 kilometers, almost, commonly a nautical mile in length. And if you know the current direction, you know how to search, and you work perpendicular to them. And that was the very same case with the Bismarck. I was running east-west lines trying to intercept the debris field, finally did, and then tracked it to the north, and then it was a huge impact crater, but there was no Bismarck in the impact crater. It turned out it set off a tremendous avalanche, and it slid downhill. Someone wants in. Let's let Jack in. There we go, Jack. So back to this. So it was really learning how to find things in the deep sea. As an aside, when I was looking for ancient shipwrecks, I discovered that if they had large caches of wine aboard, they would drink the wine and throw the amphora overboard, and would leave trails of empty bottles, sort of like searching along I-95 without an adopted highway.
Human behavior hasn't changed much over the
years. And I must say, when I was searching for ancient shipwrecks between Carthage and Rome, they increased their drinking as they approached Rome, so there was more debris. But anyway, as you can see on the right, this is just artist rendering, but I actually have pictures. That fresh paint that was on the Scorpion's bow and stern had gone away, exposing the swastikas. So this was quite a surprise when we came in and saw the swastikas still there.
Now, is that on the right side, Bob, is that the submersible that found?
That was the towed vehicle. That's the Argo. That was my towed camera system. Like I say, I use my towed camera system because I can move at fairly good clip and cover a lot of territory. And then once I find things, I then set the submersible down, or now my remotely operated vehicles. But you can tow those cameras at a fairly good clip, and you can operate 24 hours a day. So that's my primary hunting tool in tough terrain and rugged terrain. Sonars aren't very useful because you get so much backscatter. Most of my discoveries have been made visually in total darkness.
If I could ask a couple questions.
Sure,
Bob.
go ahead. Go ahead.
So back to that picture. So was that picture taken from the submersible then?
None of them were. That's artwork.
It's all artwork. Okay.
Yeah.
And then about the Bismarck.
The one on the left in this one is artwork, but the two on the right is the real photographs. You have to remember in the deep sea, you can't see but 10, 15 meters. So you don't, I mean, the best lit object in the deep sea is a self-lit object. It's sort of like one of the imaging problems in the deep sea is like driving in the fog.
Yeah.
And when you drive in the fog, you turn your high beams off because of the backscatter of raindrops. And that's why you put your low beams on. But I tell you to do an experiment next time you're in dense fog and it's safe. Turn on your high beam and then get out of the car. Not on the driving side, but get out of the car, out in the curb, and get away from the car, and you will be able to see tremendous distance. But the maximum distance underwater with a self-lit object where you don't have backscatter that you're generating is about at best just under 100 meters. So it's
with the Bismarck, Bob, wasn't there a controversy as to how it was sunk?
No, it sank itself.
They scuttled it themselves.
Yeah, the captain was given orders by Hitler because it was a brand new ship with brand new fire control, a lot of new technology, that if you get in trouble, scuttle your ship. And so they set up scuttling charges the entire length of the Bismarck. And what that causes the ship to do, which was observed, was to roll over. It unlike the Titanic, which hit the iceberg in the bow and flooded the forward compartments, 5 compartments of the forward portion of the ship, she bowed down. Same with the Lusitania, hit by a torpedo. Same with the Britannic that hit a mine. They flood forward and then tip their butt up into the air. But in the case of the Bismarck, and the same was cases I'll mention later on with the Yorktown, is when they in the case of the Bismarck, when you set off those scuttling charges, you evenly flood the ship and it simply rolls over. That's why in that image, you'll see that the main guns are gone. So the main guns, Anton, Bruno, Dora, can't remember the fourth one, but the 3 main guns of the Bismarck were in barbettes, and they simply, when the ship rolled, they just gravity fell out. In fact, I found them upside down. But all these ships that go in upside down right themselves. I found the only one ship that didn't right itself I'll mention in a minute. But in the case of the Bismarck, in the case of the Yorktown, the last scene was they were upside down. But once they get these are now, in the case of the Bismarck, is sank in 15,000 feet of water. I found ships in 18,000 feet of water, but it turns out that all ships, once they get past about 6,000 feet, all the air is gone. It's either left or it's been compressed. Remember, you get an atmosphere of pressure every 33 feet. And so once the air is released, or it's literally compressed to the size of a thimble, the ship remembers its center of gravity and it rotates back. And they go down right side up. So the Bismarck's up right side up, the Yorktown's right side up, except for the only one that that didn't was the battleship Kirishima, because it had such a gigantic superstructure, it couldn't get a righting moment. Well, I'll show you it upside down in a minute. So anyway, after doing the Titanic project, I focused on the Battle of Midway. Again, this was quite honestly a battle we shouldn't have won. We should not have won the Battle of Midway. They had their most experienced. These were the aircraft carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor. They had some of the most experienced pilots, much better trained than ours. We had 90-day wonders. They had samurais who took great lengths of time to become a pilot. This battle took place shortly after the Battle of the Coral Sea, when the Lexington was lost and the Yorktown was badly damaged. And it limped back into Pearl Harbor, and Nimitz asked, how long is it going to take to fix your ship? And they said, it'll take months. And he said, you got 90 days. because they'd cracked the Japanese code and were intercepting messages about an attack on a particular island. They used a code name, but they suspected that island was Midway. So they started sending out messages uncoded saying we're having a water problem at Midway, and then listened to the Japanese, then talk to their fleet saying the code name island is having water problems. So they now knew that they were actually going to be attacking Midway. And so the strategy was to use Midway as an unsinkable aircraft carrier. And it was quite a Donnybrook. And as you know, they literally had a heyday. The Jap Zeros had a heyday on our aircraft at low altitude, but they lost track of the Dauntless dive bombers who came in and then sank their aircraft carriers. We just recently went back to the Japanese carriers and the Yorktown. If you go to our website, nautiluslive.org, you'll see the imagery of the Japanese carriers and new images of the Yorktown. But it was not sunk, but it was taken under tow. It was going to be taken back to Pearl Harbor, but a Japanese submarine got through the destroyer screen and sank her and sent her to the bottom. And my problem was now how to search a massive area. This was over 150 nautical miles, a square mile. So it was a very large search area. And I didn't have the resources to do it with a high frequency sonar system. It was too large an area. The costs were too prohibited. So I worked with the University of Hawaii that had a surface towed side scan, very low frequency, that could have a swath width like mowing a lawn of 14 kilometers. But the problem is when you ran the math, if you ran parallel to the ship, the Yorktown, despite its length, would only be 9 pixels on your sonar map. And that's why you'll see my lines running at different, at right angles to one another. But I was lucky to pick up those 9 pixels and come in with the Navy's a new remotely operated vehicle, ATV, advanced tethered vehicle, and we were able to go down and image the Yorktown. Again, it went in upside down and we got it right side up. Now, again, you're going to see artwork in the middle and then actual photographs of the Yorktown's bridge and aircraft guns as we came in on it and were able to just film it. I can remember when we came in on the Yorktown, I had a naval personnel, enlisted man who had served on the Yorktown, and he asked me, he says, "Can you look into the flight deck on the side of the Yorktown to see if that you can see a painting on the wall, a mural on the wall?" And the mural was something they painted there for when they had entertainment, and they'd have a band, and they would come and dance in the flight deck. And sure enough, we shined our light in there, and there was the mural still on the wall. I did a book on that, as well as a TV show and lots of other things with National Geographic. So all of this is well documented, but it was fascinating to see her sitting there. I know that people always say, "How do you know it was the Yorktown?" And I said, well, it said Yorktown on the stern because these ships are perfectly preserved in the deep sea. This was a really interesting one I did. This was a program done on Operation Drumbeat, which was actually, if you can pronounce that, Paukenschlagen was the term the Germans used. This was the second happy hour when they were able to just wreak havoc on our ships in the early parts of the war. And the purpose of this was to totally disrupt our shipping routes, and as a massive amount of ships lost in the early stages of World War II during Operation Drumbeat, when they brought in their long-distance submarines and also their cows, as they called them, that they could position out in the central North Atlantic where aircraft could not reach, and they could go back and refuel and come back and back and forth. So in the early stages of World War II, this was just an amazing happy hour for the German submarines. Look at the number of ships hit by U-boats off the East Coast and in the Gulf of Mexico during that initial beginning of World War II. And these are the U-boats that they lost during the course of that. And I'm going to focus on one particular U-boat, and that dealt with a particular incident when the Robert E. Lee upper left had been out picking up survivors from the carnage that was going on in the Caribbean and the East Coast, and they were bringing the survivors of the Robert E. Lee back into the initial goal was to come in and offload their survivors in Tampa. And there was a patrol boat, PC 566, commanded by a lieutenant commander, Herbert G. Claudius, who was escorting them when a German U-boat sunk the Robert E. Lee, U-166, and the commander, lieutenant commander, was watching this occurring before his very eyes, and the German U-boat lingered a little too long with its periscope up, and they made a depth charge run on the U-166, and the lieutenant commander reported the kill, but an investigation was conducted, and it nullified his claim. And in fact, they said that was impossible because your torpedoes were all set at depth, and the U-boat was at the surface at periscope depth, and there's no way your torpedoes could have gone off. I mean, your depth charges could have gone off, and he was literally relieved of his command. Wow. And sent back to school on how to sink a sub, and literally died in humiliation for being relieved of his command. So now let's flash forward to 2001. BP was conducting a pipeline survey and found the remains of U-166 sitting right next to the Robert E. Lee.
Wow.
So, we were brought out there, and we were able to successfully find the U-boat sitting right next to the Robert E. Lee. And this was really interesting, because here this guy had been relieved of his command on the supposition that it was impossible for him to have sunk the U-166. So here's what we did. We went in and began imaging it, but we found that, if you'll notice, in the little guy in the middle, we found the stern section far from the bow section with a lot of debris in between. So literally the entire bow had been blown off. Let's see if I have that shot. That entire bow, the lower right hand, had been blown off of the remaining, the forward, central and forward aft part of the submarine. There was no way that a depth charge could have done that. But here's what we discovered, was that as he dropped his depth charges, one landed on the deck of the submerging submarine, rolled down to the bow, and then when they reached the depth that the depth charge was set at, it went off and ignited all of the torpedoes in the bow section and blew its end off. The whole front of the submarine was blown. So when I figured this out, I fortunately had really good cell coverage on my ship with satellite and everything. I contacted the Chief of Naval Operation, Admiral John Greener. Now, I'd sailed with him on the NR-1 when he was a lieutenant commander and I was a commander. He sort of blew past me to a 4-star. And I said, John, this guy got screwed. And so based upon my conversation with John, he said, well, I'm going to go over to Naval Historical and I'm going to have them open up this and completely review this incident. And sure enough, they were able to track down his son. Obviously the commander had died many years ago in shame, and they found his son, Herbert Jr., and they flew him to the Pentagon. And I was there when Secretary of the Navy Raymond Edwin Damas pinned posthumously the Legion of Merit on his son's chest. There wasn't a dry eye in the house, and you can go and see the show we did with PBS on it. I think I got it here. This is the Nazi Attack on America, Operation Drumbeat, which is a show I did with them. And by the way, as we were working in this area, it was sort of interesting. We were also documenting a lot of the ships, the U.S. ships that had been sunk during Operation Drumbeat. And so here we are merrily going around, and we encounter a sonar target that we went to investigate. And you'll see in the upper right-hand corner that the two your upper left and lower right are two of the ships the Germans sank. But this was now a very modern warship. And Spruance class, a cruiser that had been actually disappeared. And it was really interesting when we were filming this. They had removed all of the markings of this ship, and it had been battened up. And then they failed to blot out. If you look at the lower left, it says the Peterson. And it's so funny how they went all out of their way to blot out all the Navy numbers and everything, and then they left the name on the back. And when we were doing this live, the crew of the Peterson, they all called in. It was a Spruance class cruiser, and it was used for fire control testing after the Gulf War, and then they sank it, but they didn't tell anyone where they sank it. So it's always interesting when you're looking for A and you find B. So that was a fascinating side trip along the way. But again, if you want to learn more about Operation Drumbeat, you can track this down. It's a NOVA show we did. That then led to a series of expeditions dealing with the Battle of Guadalcanal, which, as you know, was 7 major battles. It stranded from August of 1942 to February 1943. By the way, the lower right, these are all artist renderings. I'll show you some real pictures in a minute, but these are all artist renderings. The lower left is the Quincy. The other one, upper right, is the Japanese destroyer Itachi. And then the artwork on the bottom is the one from the Kurishima. Here I couldn't wait to see this magnificent battleship and all of its superstructure and everything. And all I got was an upside down boat with its prop sticking out and its rudder. It was sort of very disappointing. I was hoping to see a magnificent ship on the bottom of the ocean, but that was not to be had. But as you know, I was asked, this was in 1992, on the 50th anniversary of this historic series of battles, to go into Iron Bottom Sound and track down these ships. And as you know, this was this whole thing began when the Japanese rising sun was rising after their invasion of the Philippines and Indochina, and as the rising sun was rising, they were attempting to cut off Australia and New Zealand from America, and they began building a airstrip on Guadalcanal, and they were also occupying Florida Islands, and so we needed to deal with that. And so there was the famous Battle of Salvo Island. So imagine the Marines have come ashore. They've taken Henderson Field. They named it Henderson Field. That was not its original name, obviously. And then fought off the Japanese attempts at Bloody Ridge to retake Henderson Field. But what then ensued was this initial battle. because all those transport ships were sitting right off of Henderson Field, bringing supplies aboard, and the Japanese came in. The Japanese at that time, as you know, ruled the night, but they didn't rule the day. And so they came in, snuck past the picket ship between Savo Island and Guadalcanal, and caught our fleet napping. And this was the largest naval disgrace, quite honestly, in our Navy history, with the Battle of Savo Islands, that they just went through and began sinking all of our heavy cruisers, and then felt they had to escape before the sun came up. But had they stayed, this would have been a whole nother story. If the sun had come up, they would have been able to completely destroy all of the transports and everything. So, but because they thought Halsey was in the area, which he was not, they wanted to get out of Dodge. So our mission was to go out and track down as many of these ships that we could find from those series of battles off Guadalcanal. These are the ones that I'm aware of. These are the ones that, of the large percentage of them, are the ones that I found. I found 14 of these warships. And then, as I said, Paul Allen came in afterwards and found even more. And when the dust settles again, the artwork, these are the ones we found. But it was a very, very interesting expedition. I tell a side story, because when we do National Geographic programs, we commonly find combatants from both sides. And I'll never forget, we brought together the only surviving officer from the Quincy, named Murdoch, who, when we first approached him, he was a math teacher back then in Sacramento, and he didn't want to talk about the standing on the bridge of the lower left of the Quincy when it took a direct hit, and he was literally catapulted off the bridge. And his comment was that he landed, the only thing that saved him was the bodies of the sailors beneath him. And he says, "I'll never forget landing on these dead bodies and hearing the air rush out of their lungs." He was very moved by it. And we brought a Japanese officer who had been taken a prisoner of war and was interned in prisoner camp in New Zealand, and was then, after that, went back to Japan, actually became a Presbyterian minister. And we brought the two of these combatants out. And it was a little icy when they sat around the table talking to one another. And yet, during the course of our expedition, that ice sort of began to thaw. And when you look at, I think they have the show of the TV show we did. You want to get this one, The Lost Fleet of Guadalcanal, because it's a very moving moment as we're coming back into Honiara on our ship, just really taking a picture of Guadalcanal and the lush rainforest. The Japanese officer came up on the port side towards the bow, and the Murdoch, the U.S. naval officer, came up on the starboard side, unknowingly to one another, went up to the bow, and I just never forget the shot. Tears were pouring down our face. We had a film crew up in the bridges as Murdoch put his arm around that Japanese officer and sort of got the devil out of him. And that was quite a moving moment of them being able to do that, much like what you probably experienced when you went to Vietnam, which is a pretty tough thing to do, but they were able to do that. And these are the ships we found. Those are actual pictures. I have lots of pictures, but again, there's a book I did on Guadalcanal and then a TV show. Then final one I wanted to talk about was our search for President Kennedy's PT-109, which was hit and sunk. They didn't really know exactly around midnight, whether it was midnight on August 1st or 1 a.m. on August 2nd, 1943. And again, I go at this as a whodunit kind of thing, trying to figure out, because I've always read historical records, and they'll always tell you where they think it is, and it never is there. And so I take the historical database as a starting point. And I can remember as I was researching this battle. And so fundamentally, what this was all about was Guadalcanal has now been captured by the US, and we're moving up the slot. And the slot is actually where there's literally two plates colliding, and they create a series of island chains parallel to one another. So this is along the Solomon Islands. And so the slot is that calm waters protected by, as you know, sea conditions are controlled by wind velocity, duration, and fetch. And the fetch is the distance over which the wind is blowing. So if you're near a lee of an island, it has no fetch. So the slot was always the best place to go, because regardless of wind direction, you were always going to be in relatively calm water. So the Japanese had their base up in Rabaul, and they would come down the slot on the Tokyo Express at night. And then they knew they had to get out of Dodge before they could be spotted by planes now coming out of Henderson Field. So the Coast Watchers, in fact, the Walter Lord, who wrote The Night to Remember, his first book was Coast Watchers. And it was about this period of time when the Japanese came into the Solomon Islands, which were in the control under Australia and New Zealand. And all of those Aussies and New Zealanders went into the woods, into the jungles with their natives, and became the eyes behind the enemy line. They would travel to a high vantage point, make an observation, send out a signal, and then they needed to move quickly before their signal was intercepted and the Japanese would find them. So the Coast Watchers reported that there was a run going to be made out of Rabaul and of the Tokyo Express, headed down towards Guadalcanal to resupply the Japanese that were still in the jungles at then. And so they dispatched the torpedo boats to come up through the slot and occupy the area in the slot through Blackett Strait. And John F. Kennedy's PT-109 was one of those boats. And so we all know the story is that there was this massive explosion that the Coast Watcher, who is, if you look at that little lower right, you'll see that tall volcano, it's called, and you're looking at the slot in that picture. That's a real picture of Columba Magari. It's a big active volcano. So he was sitting up there when the encounter that occurred between John F. Kennedy's PT-109 and the Japanese destroyer that literally came out of nowhere. He had thought it was still coming down the slot from the northeast to the south, from the northwest to the southeast, but in fact, it was on the return trip. And it literally came out of the darkness, and the Japanese destroyers were trained to simply run them over, to change course and run over, because the PT boat is just idling. They're idling on their main engine because they're just sitting there waiting to encounter the Tokyo Express. And so it literally went right over the top of PT-109. And there was this is where when President Kennedy hurt his back, and the gunnery officer behind him died, actually was killed by that encounter. But when that occurred, the Coast Watcher thought it was a successful kill by the PT boats, and he called in and he said, well, nice shot. And they said, no, it was not a nice shot. We lost PT-109. They were convinced that the other PT boats left the scene convinced that all hands were lost. And so so I literally went ashore on the volcano, climbed up to the spot where he was sitting and read his diary. And so I'm sitting there reading his diary about this incident. And he reported that when the sun came up the next morning, he saw an object floating in the water. And so that we thought was the PT-109. Now, the lore was that it was cut in half, that the torpedo that the destroyer literally cut PT-109 in half. So I had now the exact range and bearing to where the incident occurred, because he gave the range and bearing. And so naturally, I would go to that spot and expect, with my sonar system and ROVs, expect to find at least the bow section or the stern section of PT-109. There was absolutely nothing there. And I searched and searched and searched. We did more than 150% coverage. There was no way that guy, because as you can see, it's a fairly small area, could escape our search. But then as I continued to read his book, he said the next day there was nothing on the surface. And the next day it was back. And I said, you don't go, this is not a submarine. How do you show up one day, disappear one day, and come back up to the surface? And there was also this mythology that they found part of PT-109, the stern section, on an atoll. You'll see it in the lower part of that picture. But when I talked to the natives, they said, yeah, it was full of Japanese rifles. So we said, well, so there was no way what they found. And by the way, it was gone, long gone when we got there. So I made the assumption that turned out to be accurate, that when they hit the PT boat, they stoved it in, but did not, when you're imagining hitting something near the stern, you push it more than you run over it. And you push it and you stove it in so it floods. And that what they were seeing that next morning was when the PT boat was floating intact, but was still with a big air pocket in the bow. And over the night, when they came the next morning and didn't see it, it had sunk. So I simply did a simple extrapolation of the drift from when they saw it to when they didn't see it. And sure enough, that's where I found it. I found it further down the line. You can see that, you can see the lower bottom where I actually found it on that blue line pointed south. And that's where we found it. It was in a sandway. It was really interesting. It was when we came in with our remotely operated vehicle, we have a sonar on it, and it was able to penetrate into the bottom, and we could see the entire boat on our sonar. But just the stern section was sticking out. But we brought in experts who then identified it uniquely by the torpedo that was in the tube to being the one that was carried by PT-109. So we located it in 1,200 feet of water. What was really interesting is you'll see Max Kennedy, the Kennedy family wanted to send someone on the trip with us. And so Max Kennedy came, and we were able to find the original guides who had found Kennedy. The Coast Watcher, when they heard that the PT boat had actually sunk, they sent out their native scouts and dugouts, and they encountered Kennedy, who would leave every day and swim out and try to hail down a PT boat or anyone looking for them. And then they found him hiding on what was called Nauru Island. It was a little island. Let's see if I can back up that one. You'll see it right there at the lower right of that picture. Was Nauru Island. So it wasn't a terribly big island, but Kennedy was hiding in the woods and in the shrubbery. And I asked him, the one in the blue shirt, the other guy was a little too frail to do it. And I said, will you take me to the spot where you found President Kennedy? So we got in a small boat and we went ashore on Nauru Island. And I said, now, he pointed out, because it was so small, he says, yeah, he was right there. And then I said, so where's the coconut tree? Now, if you know the story, when Kennedy encountered the natives, they didn't speak very good English, and he certainly couldn't speak their language. So he took a coconut and he wrote a message in it. And I said, would you show me that coconut tree? And so They did, and I brought back a coconut, and I took it to the wood carvers at the Mystic Seaport Museum, and I said, I want you to go to the Kennedy Library and take out their coconut and make me an identical replica of that coconut. So this is, let me back up a little bit. Anyway, this is a better shot of that encounter. I forgot I had it. So that's where the encounter took place. That's where they swam to the was Plum Island at the time, and became now known as Kennedy Island. And then you'll see down at the very bottom is Nauru Island, and that's where he was swimming out in Blackett Strait, hoping to encounter. And this was my search ship that I used, and my side scan sonar that I used to mow the lawn. And this was the moment of the discovery of the shipwreck. And then we went down, and that's the photograph of the stern section sticking out of the sand wave. I plan to be going back to Guadalcanal in 2025, but this is Kennedy meeting with the two natives. What I find really interesting about this photograph, think about it. These two guys are still alive with no healthcare system, and all the other people are gone that had, I guess, the best healthcare system. I have to wonder about our healthcare system. These guys are doing just fine.
There's a moral in that story somewhere.
Yeah, there is. But there's the coconut that sat on President Kennedy's desk. And then I had that completely duplicated, and I have it downstairs in my archive. So again, another wonderful book and TV show. So that sort of ends my little story for the moment. And I don't know where we are time-wise, but fire away if you like. I say, I'm not a naval historian. I'm just a guy that goes and finds things.
Well, that's a pretty modest statement there, Dr. Ballard. That's fascinating. That's just a small piece, a small fraction, I know, of your exploration. Thank you very, very much.
Well, see, like I say, I turned 82 in June, and I misread the definition of retiring. What I read is I have my own ship. I've just got a contract to explore the new America for the next 10 years. And I read that during the Indianapolis 500, the race drivers race into the pit, get a new set of tires, and it's called retiring. And so I just got retired by the federal government with a new grant to do the second Lewis and Clark expedition, which is 52% of our country, believe it or not.
Wow.
Lies beneath the ocean, and we have better maps of Mars than half the United States. So that's what my ship, if you go to nautiluslive.org, we're just wrapping up. I think it's live right this second. It's been live. We're out 10 months a year. So we're just about to finish. But at that website, you'll see some of the amazing imagery we just did of a Japanese submarine, 400-foot long. Think of it, longer than a football field submarine, that was designed as a submerged aircraft carrier. 3 of them were built. Fortunately, they were never brought into action. They were built during the waning years of World War II, and they were sunk off Pearl Harbor. We went back just recently and imaged them. And so if you go to our website, you can do a little memory lane. We have the expedition we just did on the Battle of Midway, and then the images of the Japanese subs that we just imaged just weeks ago. So continue your trip down memory lane.
Yeah. Well, I'll lead off with a question or two, assuming you're okay with a few questions.
Sure.
Okay, and then any of our guests can certainly chime in. So artifacts. So a lot of discussion, a lot of controversy about bringing up artifacts from the Titanic over the years, and I've been to a couple of the Titanic exhibitions as they go around the country. What about artifacts from these military shipwrecks that you found?
Well, to begin with, you have to understand I'm a futurist. I've been in this game when we did things with 2 cans and a string. I mean, I've been in this game of deep submergence technology, beginning with the bathyscaphe, Archimede, and Trieste, which made the dive in 1960 in Challenger Deep. So I've been watched the evolution of the technology. And when you look at my ship, I actually have my own command center within 15 minutes of my home. My wife wouldn't let me build it here. But I have a command center that when I step in it, I'm on the ship. And we're moving more and more. I have very significant grants. I have the longest running grant with the Office of Naval Research, which has supported me for 57 years.
Wow.
They've funded me as I moved from taking humans down to the bottom of the ocean, initially in bathyscaphe and then in modern deep submersibles. I also spent 30 years in and out of the Navy's NR-1, which is the smallest, deepest diving nuclear submarine. And where we've gone with the technology now. So we've gone from, remember, we're land animals. We love air, we love 1 atmosphere, and we like to be reasonably warm, and that's why I have the fire going. But it turns out that if you were to freeze every human on Earth right now, you'd find that 90% of them are standing on less than 10% of the planet at this very second. Yeah. And that's because 52% is underwater, and of the 28, a huge percentage of that is either a desert or an Arctic region. And so we're moving away from humans at sea. And combat is all about a war of attrition, as Russia's licking their chops on right now. And it was sort of like Patton's speech: "Don't die for your country, make the other son of a bitch die for his." And so the warfare of the future is a warfare of robots. And we're moving more and more into the use of autonomous vehicle systems and the use of AI. And the question is, at some point, do you give robots the opportunity to kill without talking to a human? And that's the big line in the sand right now. But my research has moved more and more away from keeping humans from the bottom of the ocean. When I went down 20,000 feet in the bathyscaphe Trieste 2, it took me 6 hours to get down, 6 hours to get back, because of the coefficient of drag is an exponential function in it. And if you want to go down to the deep sea, you can't just power down. You don't have any power when you arrive. So you literally free fall against the coefficient of drag, and your average descent rate is 100 feet a minute. Titanic was 2.5 hours to get down. Trieste down to 20,000 feet was 6 hours. So we then moved away from sending bodies to sending robots. And then we went beyond that to where we're now using autonomous vehicles. In fact, if you look at our website, we just did an expedition where we had an autonomous ship, surface ship called Drix. And there's Ocean Infinity is now building armadas where there's, and DARPA, as you know, developed the totally uncrewed ship to hunt down Soviet submarines. I use the word Soviet, seems appropriate. And so where we're headed is a world where there's a human in the loop, or not, but certainly I hope always a human in the loop, but where are they? And so you're moving the spirit, and the spirit's indestructible. It moves at the speed of light and leaves no carbon footprint. So electronic travel is going to be a lot of fun in your home when the den comes back and you're somewhere else mentally. I now go into my command center a few miles from my home and transport myself mentally to the battlefield of science. And I can remember the first time I did it. When you do it, you literally become fully immersed. And we're building now immersive camera systems with 360 degrees, 16K, getting to where you can fool the mind into where they think you are. I mean, how many movies do you watch now going, what's real and what's not real? So where we're headed is a world of teleoperated robotic systems and swarming technology. We're now developing the same thing that drones are doing in the air, of swarming technology underwater, where you overpower the enemy with mass numbers of systems. They had a DARPA program I was surprised they showed the public on, I think it was on 60 Minutes, where they had a football field full of mannequins and they put different faces on them, and then flew in and dropped 100 small drones, and they swarmed up. And as they came after that one head, everyone's trying to shoot it down. It got through and blew the head off of just the one mannequin. So where we're at is, get to your question. Believe it or not, I'm going to get to it. What is running right by the Titanic right now, and was there before the Titanic sank? The cables connecting Europe to North America. The Titanic was on the same damn trade route because of the distance of shortness that the AT&T and everyone was running their cables. I have a program with Ocean Network Canada called, if you go online and look at Ocean Network Canada, they have a subducting plate off of the British Columbia, same problem off Oregon and Washington, where that plate, when it locks up and then goes, it sets off a giant earthquake, generates a tsunami that can ruin your day. And so what they wanted to put in is a cabled network system to be able to give us a sort of a dew line, an early warning of an earthquake has just occurred, and you have 20 minutes to get up 3 stories. Tidal waves or tsunamis is what they really are. They're not tidal at all, or a surge of water. And if you can get up, it's the chairs and cars that kill you, not the surge itself. And so we're now wiring the underwater world. So we have an underwater vehicles right now installed off Canada. So let's go out at 500 nautical miles off Canada is this network. And there's an underwater robot that's connected to its operator in Germany.
Wow.
Fiber connected all the way across. One fiber link after another. So you're talking speed of light, not up in a satellite where you have to go great distance, just straight across. And you're operating that robot from in Germany. And so imagine if I said to you, you want to go see the Titanic? Well, let's go. You're going to have in your home, and I already have it, so it's not futuristic. I already have this capability where I can use a robot and think I'm there. And think I'm there. And what's really funny is when you really get into it, you really think you're there, and then you get up and you go to the bathroom in Connecticut, which is sort of somewhat of a warp. Wait a minute, I'm now in Connecticut. So, but it turns out that you adapt. Humans are terribly adaptive, and you will literally be sitting in your home in easily a decade, if not sooner, renting a robot from Hertz on the Serengeti and driving a Jeep around and get a phone bill. And that's where we're headed with this technology. So why do you want to destroy the place? My family came to America in 1635, and they divided into the Massachusetts Ballards and the Virginia Ballards, and they met at Gettysburg. One wore blue and one wore gray. God help us if we're not headed down that road again. When I was born, there were still drummer boys alive from the Civil War.
Yep.
Not that far in our past. And so you don't go to Gettysburg with a shovel. You don't go to the Arizona and take belt buckles off the Arizona. It's the place that speaks. The rest is sort of, I've walked so many battlefields. Go to walk Custer's Last Stand. Go to the Battle of Saratoga when Benedict Arnold rolled up the Burgoyne's right flank, and they were Hessians. Go and walk on those battlefields, and the ground speaks to you. So it is not the object. So it's disgusting that they're taking objects that are perfectly fine for thousands of years. You bring up China, my God, they bring the Ming wrecks are perfectly preserved. What was going to go is gone. That ship has equilibrated. They talk about the rust. That's baloney. That ship, if you scratch 1 inch down in that bow, you get a brand new hull because it's an anoxic area. So you do not want to destroy Gettysburg and build a bunch of condos and say, well, we moved the artifacts and everything. It's the place. So yeah, other than that, I don't have a very strong feeling about it.
Yeah, if you really feel strong about it, speak up soon here, Bob.
No, it's just sad.
Yeah,
because they're justifying what they're doing, which is built on, wonderful fake news.
Well, that's a lovely answer. That's a beautiful answer. I see a hand up. I'm sorry, who has their hand up there? Todd?
That'd be Trey. Trey,
Okay.
how you doing, Trey Berman? Good to see you. We also had a question here in the chat I want to pass along, but I want to just echo this quotation I wrote down. I'm a guy who finds things.
And ticks people off when I do it because I generally find things that they were supposed to find, and I'm not qualified.
I love that's like, I mean, that's like Einstein. I'm just a guy who has these ideas. Um, we have a question here. Chuck Meyer says, could you talk about the difference, if there is any, between your approach and Paul Allen's approach to this kind of exploration?
Well, he's a billionaire and I'm not. That's a big difference. You look at Ray Dalio and his new ship. You look at Eric Schmidt of Google and his ship. I guess I made it look like a lot of fun, and a lot of these people, write a check. I'm the first of 13 generations of my family to go to college. I was born in Wichita, Kansas, where all oceanographers come from. And, 8 generations of Quakers. So I'm not a person of wealth. And so I have to, I'm just not, I can't write a check. Boy, don't I wish I could go where I want to go, but I have to raise the funds to do it. I can't just write a check. And that's all those, they just write a check, go where they want to go. But they don't have staying power, because when you're a billionaire, everything has to move like that.
Yeah.
And I'm not patient on land, but I'm a very patient person at sea. You don't push Neptune around. You have to not fight him. You have to make love to him. He has to let you in. And you need a team. Think about it. I've been supported by the Office of Naval Research for 57 years. I've been supported by the National Geographic for 55 years. I've been supported by NOAA for 50 years. Why? Well, I must be delivering on my promises. And we'll see if anyone, good luck. See how long they run. Because, you got to love it. And it can't be just something you write a check for. You've got to have it in your genes. And like I said, this new research and the dyslexic advantage, I have a chapter in there, says that Dr. Helen Taylor has done the research that dyslexics are great explorers. So I'm wired for it. And I also, when you're dyslexic, you don't like society because the rules are written by non-dyslexics. So I've spent most of my life where no humans are found.
Boy, I could listen to you all night. Trey Berman, how are you? It's been a while since I've seen you. You've had your hand up here.
Thank you. It's been a minute, I will say. And I just had a question. I wanted to say something. Dr. Ballard, I'm blown away right now, because I never thought I'd be able to hear you just speak. If you haven't noticed, if anyone here who kind of seen me before hasn't noticed, I'm kind of a boat person. And just sitting right next to me, I have 4 models of ships that you've discovered. I have the Titanic right there. I have PT-109. I have Bismarck, and then under here I have Yorktown. And I used to actually have Lusitania's sister. I know you didn't discover her, but you did a lot of research on her. I
wanted to find out what that second explosion was about.
Wasn't it a coal fire?
What it was, just a quick side note, we'll skip out of World War II and go to the start of World War I. The Lusitania, was on her way to England at the end of her journey. She was fundamentally used up most of her coal. And when she came off the old head of Kinsale, she was going in to make sure she knew where she was, and that's where the German submarine was waiting for her. And they only fired 1 torpedo. But there was two explosions, and so the Germans' view was, well, see, it had war materials on it, and we hit the war materials, justifying they struck metals for one another. Was sort of interesting. But in fact, they had war materials aboard, it turned out, when they had the lawsuit of the people who were on the Lusitania sued the Cunard Line, and Remington did admit that they had war material on the Lusitania, but they were empty shells. There was no explosives. There was just artillery shells and things like that. And so when we went down, we said, well, let's go and look at the magazine. Because if it did, because the shot came in on the starboard side of beam of the bridge, but not far from the magazine up in the bow. And we were able to show the magazine was completely intact. But what we did see was when you put coal in these ships, the coal bunkers were right on the outward side of the ship, because they didn't want to bring the coal through the ship. So we would open doors and put the coal in. And so we collected some of the coal on the bottom, and it was bituminous coal, which is highly explosive. And so what happened was when the torpedo hit, it put all of that coal dust up and then ignited it. So the secondary explosion was literally a coal dust explosion. And so we were trying to, that was our job, was to figure out what sank it, because the magazine was absolutely intact.
Yeah.
But anyway, back to your comment.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. I thought I read in Deadwake that it was a magazine explosion, but then I've also heard contradictory information that it was a coal fire. But yeah, no, so I'm blown away by you being here. It means a lot to me. I've sailed for my entire life. Todd, I have an explanation for why I'm not here. I started volunteering on a Liberty ship as an assistant engineer in the engine room on the John W. Brown. Pretty fun. It's a cool thing to do. And then I just have a bunch of models. It's been something I've been into for a while.
Get my, I just recently did an autobiography, Into the Deep, but because I don't read books, I had to make a TV version of it. So if you get Apple TV and Disney, go to Disney Plus, and you'll see the film version. Like I said, I didn't read 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I watched the movie. And so that was fun. And then there's also on Disney Plus, I did the Amelia Earhart expedition, and I'm going for round 2. Like I say, you can't find these things right away. So we had a really nice, it's called the Amelia expedition. It's on Disney Plus. But yeah, wish me luck on the next shot at Amelia.
I will.
Just had an amazing expedition going after Cleopatra's lost tomb off Egypt, and we think we may have got it. So stay tuned on that one.
Yeah, I think, sorry. My main question that I was trying to get to is actually, it's the bottom of my model shelves, and that's my Great Lakes shelf.
Oh yeah, I've spent a lot of time in Thunder Bay.
Sorry, my parents just got home. But my main question was going to be, very recently and very controversially, the Canadian government has started banning dives to a lot of those famous Great Lakes ships. I know Fitzgerald was first, so Edmund Fitzgerald was the first. And I think recently they also banned dives to the Carl D. Bradley and the Daniel J. Morrell because they found bodies down there as well, because that's the issue with the Great Lakes is a lot of times there are bodies slipped down with the ship.
Yeah, I think also that's is in Lake Ontario, the Hamilton and the Scourge, which were two U.S. warships, the only warships that the president gave away, which was President Carter gave the Hamilton and the Scourge to the Canadians at the town of Hamilton, and that's an interesting. We've spent a fair amount of time on that, and there still are MIAs there. There's still the bodies are the flesh is gone. That's eaten very quickly, but unlike the deep sea, it's the bones made out of calcium carbonate. They're not. The water saturated, so they don't dissolve. In the deep sea, like the Titanic and most of the ships we find, they're below the calcium carbonate compensation depth, and the bones dissolve. It's about 7 years, and that's what you had in the Titanic and the Bismarck. Just the shoes and the things that the animals don't eat, and they don't like tannic acid in the boots. So the German Bismarck had German boots. I even found on Roman ships Roman sandals, and certainly on the Titanic pairs of shoes everywhere. most powerful image was the pair of mother's shoes next to her daughter's shoes. That was a pretty powerful image. Again, were you going to pick up her purse?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So my question kind of gets to that issue of what Glenn's question was as well. Is I know your ideas and your kind of your kind of feelings about taking from wrecks and the Canadian bannings of those dives and of those, you know, explorations has you know, prevented more things being stolen from those wrecks. Because I know very famously, like Fitz lost her bell. And then that was a big hotspot for a lot of the families of the survivors. But it also means we can't explore them anymore. We'll probably
you
know
can.
what sank the Fitz.
But you can. I mean, again, this technology. I worked a lot with the National Marine Sanctuary Thunder Bay. So over in Lake Huron, there's over 200 ships. The biggest issue we're having there is the zebra mussels that have come in and are now fixing on the wooden ships. So you should go and look at the Hamilton, the Scourge, and other ones before the zebra mussels and after the zebra mussels. The water's gotten extremely clear because they're great filter feeders, but it's the attack of the zebra mussels, just simply attaching and boring into the wood. That's the sad note in the Great Lakes ships. But we just found, if you get, again, New York Times just did an article on one of the ships we just found up in Lake Huron, perfectly preserved, standing upright, mast and everything. Because freshwater, there's no wood borers like we have on the Titanic, or in the saltwater environment, you have teredos or wood borers, but they don't exist in freshwater. So they are very highly preserved. And like I say, in the case of the Hamilton Scourge, the skeletons are still there, and they've not recovered the MIAs.
Oh boy, Chris Perello, how are you?
Fine, Todd. Welcome back. Dr. Ballard, it's an honor to speak to you tonight. I recall that once you had discovered the Titanic, shortly thereafter, there was, I thought that the White Star Line had legal claim to everything there, and they declined.
No,
They declined.
That's not the case. Shipwrecks depends on a lot of factors. If they're a warship, they're forever the property of the country, no matter where they are. I remember when I found the Bismarck, there were two Germanys, which was an interesting discussion on which Germany claimed the Bismarck and the West Germans did. But you can have the Lusitania, for example. There's still an owner that owns it. There, in the case of the Titanic sister ship, the Britannic, there's an owner. But in the case of the Titanic, when it sank, the insurance company paid off the White Star Line and then wrote it off their books as a loss. That makes it an abandoned shipwreck. And so when I found the Titanic, and I was aware of Admiralty law, I went to the jurisdiction, which was in Norfolk, and I said, "So what's the situation?" So, "Well, you found it, and it's an abandoned shipwreck. When you go back, just bring up one object, and we'll make you salvor possession." And I said, what does that mean? It means that you own it, but you must remove it from the bottom of the ocean. And I said, well, I don't want to remove it. I want to leave it where it is. Well, then you can't claim it. And that's when the French came in with a car dealership in Connecticut, believe it or not, and went out and began the salvage operations. So, yeah, I mean, we were the law we were resting our case on was Admiralty law of the 1700s. So. Yeah, but no, the Titanic was an abandoned shipwreck.
Could the UN have claimed it as an international historic site like they do several other places?
It had to be it wasn't 100 years. It had to be 100 years, and it wasn't 100, it was 80. So there's still a big, it's this, I really don't want to go down the road because of what recently happened, and I'm aware of the people who died, and I knew Stockton Rush very well, and they crossed the line. An uncertified submarine. I never feared for my pressure hull because it was either steel or titanium, and it had been pressure tested to be, in some cases, the safety factors we use is 1.5. It's a carryover from World War II submarines. where they only went a few hundred feet, and so you had to go a few more hundred feet before you hit collapse depth. And here you're now talking about having a vehicle that can go to 20,000 feet and it'll collapse at 30,000 feet. Well, it's impossible to collapse your submarine if you never dive deeper than your diving depth. And so, diving the Titanic, I had a 1.5 safety factor on my titanium hull, so there was no way I could possibly exceed my design depth, not my collapse depth. But they had an uncertified submarine of a material that is designed to hold pressure in, not hold pressure out. So they crossed all.
I was shocked to understand that the industry, the submersible vehicle industry, is not centrally regulated, that it's self-regulated by the institutions.
No,
and
no,
the,
it's regulated by the no, it's at the ABA. It's regulated. You cannot, in all the vehicles. Think about it. Our first deep vehicle was the Trieste in 1960, and during the course of our history of deep submergence, we've never lost a person due to a submarine. Not a single individual. It's safer to drive. It's safer to go on a deep submersible than drive down an I-95. So we haven't lost a soul, knock on wood, because we have very stringent rules, and it had to be certified. You cannot do that, but they went around those rules.
Thank you for clarifying that.
It's gotten to be 8:32, Todd. Do you think we
Yeah,
have...
I gotta actually commencements tomorrow for some. I gotta put some hoods on some people, so I need to get my gown out.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Ballard, for joining us and sharing so much time with us. Thank you, Jeff, for connecting us, and to all of you for joining us tonight. I look forward to seeing everybody on Monday night. We're going to have another celebrity, Donald L. Miller, author of Masters of the Air, which is being made into which is going to, the Apple Plus series will be debuting in next month. We'll be talking with author Donald Miller. Please do join us Monday night at 7 p.m. Glenn will be hosting again. I will be there. Thank you all. Good night. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care.
Thank you all.